The next thing that we're going to do is move along to removing all of our lug nuts and then the wheel. Now that the wheel's out of the way, let's go ahead and remove our axle bolt right here. Take a punch and a hammer, come right inside where the axle is and break it free from the bearing. Now that we have the axle bolt off of there, let's continue on to removing the flex hose from its mounting bracket right here. Now let's follow that hose down and we'll remove our 2 caliper bracket mounting bolts. Start that in a couple threads. Let's hang it so it's putting no pressure on the flex hose. Remove the rotor. Disconnect the ABS wire from your ABS sensor. It's going to press on the center tab and then remove it. Inspect the wire, make sure it's in good condition, and set it aside. Let's remove our lower ball joint nut. Let's leave that nut on there just a couple threads so we can break the ball joint free. Once it seems as though it's moving, go ahead and fully remove the nut. Remove the tie rod end nut. Leave that on a couple threads. Let's give this a couple loving bonks. All right. Separate this. From the front of the knuckle, let's go ahead and remove this upper bolt. It's going to come straight on through. Now we need to go ahead and spread this area right here. To do that, I'm just going to use a pry bar. I'll give it a couple loving bonks just to help break it free. While it's spread, go ahead and spray in some penetrant. Let's pull down on this control arm. We're going to separate the ball joint from the knuckle. Let's take our hammer and hit right up along the top of this knuckle right here. That's going to bring this down. You want to be very careful not to damage your axle or, of course, your ball joint boot. Let's get this to the press. Now we're going to go ahead and have to try to press the wheel bearing out of the knuckle area here. You're going to see you have your ABS sensor that comes right on through. You want to be very careful not to break that by pressing this out. Commonly, if you wanted to, you can come up along the top right there, remove that bolt, and then just give this a couple wiggles and you should be able to pull it out. If yours is very rusted like ours, more than likely it's going to break, so I'm going to try to do it without actually removing the sensor. With the knuckle over at the press, the next thing that we need to do is start lining everything up. Essentially, I want to be driving out the inside area of this bearing so it goes out through the outer portion of the knuckle itself. Looking underneath this area, you can tell that I have it supported by where the actual caliper bracket area is, and of course where the tie rod end arm is. That's going to make it so this is supported, and it's going to make it so I can push out the actual hub itself. So I'm just going to take a socket that fits right over this hub area here, and then of course I'll take something that takes up the space, and then we'll start pressing this down. You want to make sure that you have hand and eye protection at all times. Now let's carefully start pressing this down. There it is, friends. Now before we can go ahead and insert our brand new bearing, of course we're going to want to make sure that we clean up this entire area. Make sure that you don't have any debris inside this area, especially all the way down where the bearing's going to press into. Aside from that, double check your ABS sensor. Make sure that it's not damaged in any way. If it is, now's a perfect time to go ahead and replace it. Now it's going to be time to get ready to install our brand new hub and bearing. Make sure you notice the way that I have this set up. I have a block that's going along the back side of the knuckle, essentially just kind of holding it still so it's not going to move. I also want to make sure that I don't have anything anywhere near my ABS sensor. Let's go ahead and take this. We're going to line it up. And when we start pressing this down, we want to make sure that we're pressing it down as straight as possible. If it goes off kilter, you could potentially damage the bearing, the knuckle, or both. With this as straight as possible, let's continue on by pressing this down and in. Now I'm going to continue pressing this until I feel as though it just barely bottoms out. You don't need to go too much further than that. Okay, right there, I can feel that it doesn't want to go any further. That means I can stop. Let's release pressure. Now we can remove this from the press, and we're going to give this a nice spin. Make sure it spins properly. Looking at the back side of the knuckle, you can tell that the bearing's exactly where it needs to be. It's not hitting up against the ABS sensor in any way, and it looks like it's functioning properly. Before we go ahead and put this on the car, pay attention to the inner area of the knuckle where the strut's supposed to be. Make sure you clean that out of any debris. Also, the strut itself. Clean up the shaft where it goes into the knuckle. Now we can continue on by getting this onto the car. Start the ball joint stud in there. Start on the ball joint nut, snug it up. Torque the ball joint nut to 52 foot-pounds. I'm going to use a pry bar, carefully come through the wheel bearing itself to hold it from spinning. And I can hold this and torque it. Let's apply some copper never sees into the splined area of the bearing. We're going to line up the axle with the bearing at the same time as we start lining up the knuckle with the strut. Let's slide it all together. Line this up. Now I'm just going to wiggle this around, and essentially we want to make sure that the back side of the knuckle, the slot on it at least, is going to line up with this area on the back of the strut. Now let's carefully apply pressure underneath the control arm, raising up the knuckle so that it lines up properly with the strut itself. Now let's put our pinch bolt in there. Make sure that you use a little bit of red thread locker on the threads. Now let's continue on by bottoming out this bolt, and then we'll torque it to 66 foot-pounds. Release the pressure. Let's get our sway bar link back on here, with of course the ABS wire bracket, and then the nut. Let's torque this to 37 foot-pounds. Let's reconnect our ABS wire. We're going to press it in and listen for a click. There it is. Give it a little wiggle, make sure it's secure. Insert your outer tie rod end into your knuckle. Put the nut on there, we'll start it on, bottom it out, and then torque it to 37 foot-pounds. Now it's going to be time to put our rotor on. Obviously, our rotor is going to need to be replaced, but that's a video for another day. What I would recommend is to clean the entire mating surface on the inside portion right here. You want to make sure you have no debris in this area where it mounts up against the bearing. Apply some copper never sees to the mating surface. Slide your rotor on. Use one of your lug nuts to hold it so it can't wobble around while you continue working. Make sure you clean up the threads on your caliper bracket bolts. Apply some red thread locker, and then let's get ready to install the caliper. Now let's bottom these out and torque them to 88 foot-pounds. Now let's get our axle bolt in there. It's recommended to make sure that you use a brand new bolt, and I like to use a little bit of red thread locker. Let's bottom this out, then we'll torque it to 26 foot-pounds, and then we'll turn it an additional 90 degrees. To be able to torque this, you're going to notice that this is going to want to spin. I just use a pry bar coming straight across the studs down to the ground to prevent it from spinning. Now for the additional 90 degrees, I'm going to start with my ratchet straight up and down, and I'm going to bring it so it's at approximately 3 o'clock. Remove your lug nut. Let's resecure our flex hose. Now we can get the wheel back up on here. We'll snug it up, get the wheel back on the ground, and then we'll torque it to manufacturer's specifications. With the wheel on the ground, let's torque these to 81 foot-pounds. Torqued. Okay friends, that job's in the books. What's left to do now? Take it for a road test down to your local alignment shop.